Salt has never been a kitchen image. It has never been about taste. It has never been about making food better or making people nicer. Salt in the ancient world was life. Salt was strength. Salt was preservation. Salt was the mineral fire that made the inner water come alive. When the earliest river teachers spoke of salt, they were speaking of the same inner truth that ran through every teaching of the river way. Water is the current. Salt is the charge. Together they create awareness. Together they create life. Together they create clarity. Separate them, and the human being collapses into dryness, confusion, and spiritual death. This is why the later church never understood the saying about salt losing its savor. They thought Jesus was talking about character or morality or usefulness in society. They missed the entire point because they read the words through the sky religion lens where everything becomes a parable about obedience. But the earliest layer of the movement was not sky religion. It was Simon. It was the river. It was the great life. And when you put the salt saying back where it belongs, the whole thing explodes with meaning. The human body runs on water and electricity. The river inside you, which is the cerebrospinal flow, carries awareness. The salt inside you charges that river and gives it potency. Without salt, your nerves cannot fire. Your muscles cannot move. Your brain cannot communicate. Your heart cannot keep rhythm. Salt is not a flavor enhancer. Salt is the mineral that lets consciousness exist. If the salt inside a person loses its charge, the entire system collapses. The mind becomes foggy. The muscles weaken. The inner river slows. The clarity fades. In ancient language, this was called losing savor. It meant losing the inner potency that makes a human being alive and awake. It meant losing the very thing that brings the inner river to life. Imagine the river and the salt inside you the way Simon understood them. Water is the great life. Salt is the inner fire. Water without salt is stagnant. Salt without water is harsh and dead. But together they create vitality. Together they create balance. Together they create awakening. The earliest teachers understood this long before biology was written on paper. They knew that the human being is a vessel of water charged by mineral fire. They knew that when the inner river flows and the salt has its full savor, the person becomes clear-seeing, aware, and alive. They knew that when the salt loses its savor, the charge is gone, and the person sinks into dryness, which Simon called ignorance, because dryness was the sign of a mind disconnected from its source. So when the teacher said if the salt loses its savor it is worthless, he was not condemning people. He was diagnosing a spiritual condition. A person whose inner charge has collapsed has nothing to give because they are not connected to the river. They cannot preserve their own life. They cannot preserve truth. They cannot preserve clarity. They cannot preserve awareness because they have lost the inner force that makes these things possible. The saying was never about being good or useful. It was about whether a person still has the inner potency of life or whether their river has gone electrically dead. This fits Simon perfectly. This fits the riverway perfectly. This fits the biology perfectly. Salt is the mineral side of awakening. Water is the fluid side of awakening. Awareness is the union of the two. When the inner river flows through the ventricles and the spinal column, it carries clarity. When salt empowers that river, the clarity becomes consciousness. If the salt loses its savor, the inner fire dies out, and the river cannot carry awareness. The human being becomes spiritually tasteless, meaning empty, meaning unaware, meaning disconnected from the great life. Look at how deeply this ties into the ancient world. Salt preserved food because salt held life. Salt purified wounds because salt carried fire. Salt was currency because salt was survival. Salt was placed in covenants because salt represented continuity and memory. Salt was used in offerings because salt symbolized the inner fire of life itself. Everything about salt pointed to one truth. Without it, nothing endures. Nothing remains. Nothing stays alive. That is why the earliest river teachers used salt to describe the condition of the human soul. A person with savor is alive with inner strength. A person without savor is spiritually decomposing. The image is not moral. It is biological and symbolic at the same time. The inner fire has gone out. When you see the saying through this lens, you understand what the later church never could understand. The saying is not about behavior. It is about the electrical state of the inner river. It is about whether a person is awake or asleep. It is about whether the cerebrospinal river is charged or drained. It is about whether a person is connected to the source or lost in dryness. Dryness is the death of the river. Dryness is the death of awareness. Dryness is the death of the inner life. A person without savor is spiritually dry because the salt that energizes the inner river has collapsed. The earliest teachers spoke this way because they understood the body from the inside out. They felt the river rise in moments of clarity. They felt the inner spark ignite when truth returned. They knew salt and water were metaphors for inner states as real as breath and heartbeat. This is why the saying ends with the idea that tasteless salt is thrown out and trampled. That is not condemnation. That is diagnosis. When the inner fire is gone, the person collapses into confusion. They lose direction. They lose clarity. They lose strength. They are tossed by life and stepped on by circumstance because they cannot stand. Salt without savor is a person without inner charge. A person whose river cannot carry awareness. A person whose truth is buried. A person whose mind has lost its clarity because the inner fire is gone. Bring this back to the river way, and everything becomes transparent. The river is the water inside the brain. The savor is the charge that salt gives to that river. The awakening is the moment when water and fire meet inside the mind and clarity floods the self. The teaching about salt is not a warning. It is a map. It tells you what happens when you disconnect from the river and what happens when you return. A person with savor is alive. A person without savor is spiritually collapsed. The path back is not belief or ritual or obedience. The path back is restoration of flow and charge. The path back is returning to the great life. The path back is awakening the river. This is the meaning the scribes could never erase because the truth is written into the human body itself. The body remembers what the teachers said. The inner river remembers. The inner fire remembers. The teaching is older than scripture and stronger than doctrine because it is woven into water and salt and breath. When you restore the river and the savor, you restore the self. When you awaken the inner fire, the clarity returns. When you reconnect to the source, the salt becomes full again, and the river becomes alive again, and the self becomes what it was meant to be from the beginning. Rishima Raymond Taylor, keeper of the river and light.